Welcome to the Steelers Breakdown podcast from PennLive, featuring PennLive Steelers beat reporter Nick Farabaugh, who is fresh from the Mike Tomlin press conference, where we got very doubtful news about George Pickens and that touchy hamstring of his that created some last-minute scrambling ahead of the showdown with the Browns at Acrisure Stadium. It thrust the likes of Scotty Miller into a uniform, and Mike Williams, the little used Mike Williams, saw his most extended action so far as a Steeler, but it still wasn't a lot. But we should be seeing a lot more because it looks like Pickens is going to be out for the big game in Philly. And I don't know about other fans, but I'm feeling very pessimistic. It's a place where the Steelers haven't won since like 1965. Now, of course, we don't play all that often, but it's not a good track record. And this game, maybe it's the curse of the Steagles. Remember the Steagles? They're the Steelers-Eagles amalgamation team that was formed during World War II. So maybe it has something to do with that. But any way you slice it, it's looking gloomy heading into the city of brotherly love. And that begins a gauntlet, an incredible, I don't know if it's ever been, another team has faced anything similar, where we're going to play three elite teams in like 10 or 11 days. I mean, you got the Ravens looming in Baltimore, and then you have the Christmas present of the Chiefs at Acrisure on Christmas Day. So let's go right to Nick to see the latest word on Pickens, how the Steelers were able to scramble at the last minute and get that offense together to beat the Browns, this collective effort, this quintessential collective effort that Tomlin was praising on Tuesday, but what looms large against the Eagles. So, Nick, give us the backstory on this touchy hamstring and what's going on with it.
Yeah, they didn't expect it to be this significant. I think that's the point. And so you were wondering, how did this kind of all come together, right? He went from questionable on Friday, and Mike Tomlin even gave an interview with CBS Sports like 2 hours before the game that he was going to be a good to go, right? They thought that he was going to play, be on a pitch count, as he said, play on third downs, red zone, different things like that. So they were going to be cautious with it, but he was going to be playing. And he was out there on Friday. Like, he went through individual drills. He was running. He ran routes. Didn't do team, but it's basically what happened. He hurt the hamstring late in Thursday's practice, and experienced discomfort the next day. They limited him. Thought it was going to be fine. He did not get an MRI on this injury before the game. They thought it was a fine grade 1 because he responded well on Friday. So they thought he would be good to go. But then he showed up on Sunday with a pretty significant limp. Went through a short warm-up. Clear as day he was not going to play. And so they ruled him out right there and then. Got an MRI after the game, which revealed a grade 2 hamstring strain, not a grade 1 hamstring strain. So a grade 2 hamstring strain is the same strain that Nick Herbig, Corey Trice, Roman Wilson all suffered. All those guys missed 4 more games. Just to put it into, Trice missed 8 games on IR. Roman Wilson still is on IR. And Herbig missed 4 games, plus 1 was after the bye week. So really, it took Herbig 6 weeks to get back from his injury. But I will give you that not all grade 2 hamstrings are created the same. Jaylen Warren had a grade 2 hamstring strain in August, and Justin Fields had a grade 2 hamstring strain right before the bye week. Justin Fields had a very similar injury to George Pickens, where he suffered that late in the week, did not play against the Giants. They had the bye week. He returned after the bye. So I was told that if they had a game during that bye week, Justin Fields would not have played that game. So he would have missed 2 games and then was back for the third game. So what I am trying to tell you is I believe that it is more on the spectrum towards the Field side than the Herbig, Trice, Wilson side. Those guys are going to miss, it took 2 months for Trice to get back. It took 6 weeks for Herbig to get back. Who knows how long it's going to take Roman Wilson to get back. But I do not believe it's going to take George Pickens that long. I do not think George Pickens is going to go. If that was the level of severity we were talking about with George Pickens, they would be putting him on injured reserve today, and he would be activated for that wild card round playoff game. That is what I was told. So it is not a significant grade 2 strain. So do not expect it to be something where he misses the rest of the regular season. Now, could he not play again this regular season? Sure, but that's going to mainly be because the Steelers, get their scenarios down. They don't need him, right? So they'll be able to rest him in certain scenarios. Like, I think it's going to be interesting if they go into Philadelphia this week and win, clinch their playoff spot, what they do. And certainly, I think if he doesn't play against Baltimore, and I think that's up in the air right now, he's not going to play this week. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion. Mike Tomlin basically said as much. He has an outside chance. I think it's very much 50-50 whether he plays in Baltimore. And then I think you could say the same about Christmas just because it's so close, right? It's the short week. I think if they had a Sunday to Sunday or a Saturday to Sunday from that Ravens to Chiefs game, I think he would play against the Chiefs for sure. But because they have a short week, can't tell you for sure. He could play against the Ravens, but I do think, let's say if they get all their scenarios down, win the North against the Ravens and he doesn't play, I wouldn't be surprised if they just keep him out because they might not have much to play for. The Chiefs can clinch the 1 seed this week if the things go right for them. So, I'm not gonna. I think they're gonna play this pretty cautiously. They've played these injuries very cautiously all year. Herbig probably could have played against the Commanders. They held him out. Highsmith could have played a week earlier. They held him out. Jaylen Warren could have come back a week earlier. They held him out. I'm just thinking about all the scenarios they have gone through with guys that are stars or significant players this year that they have held out a week longer to make sure they're back to full health. You don't want George Pickens to come back and George Pickens to not be George Pickens. I think that's the thing that they want to make sure. So this hamstring injury, it's tricky, John. We'll see. Again, I think it ranges from somewhere between that he misses, I think he's going to be out this week. He could miss the next 2 games after that. If that Cincinnati game matters, I think he will definitely be back for that Cincinnati game. I think there's a chance he's as back as early as Baltimore. I think the plan for them this week, from what I've heard, is to get him some light work this week. And what I mean by that is running off to the side, ramp him up a little bit, and try to set the table for him during that week next week to maybe go against the Ravens, even if it's just on a pitch count, like how they were supposed to do against Cleveland. They're going to try and set the table for him to come back next week. We will see if that happens. It's all going to be about how he responds, how he feels. They don't want to aggravate it. They don't want to push it too hard because then again, because what's going to happen is, John, if he does aggravate it, you're going to be looking at a scenario where he's gone on IR and he probably doesn't even play in the playoffs. That's the thing that they don't want, right? They don't want George Pickens to aggravate this and then miss the playoffs because then you just nuke the season, essentially. And so they need to be careful with this, but I think they're going to try and get him back for Baltimore, but I don't think that's a guarantee. It's going to be all about how he responds. We will see. I don't think they know if he's going to play in Baltimore. I think they know he's not going to play here in Philly unless he just responds exceptionally well to what their light training regimen, the running that he's going to do this week. Unless he responds extremely well, I do not think we see him this week. But we will see. I
think you're right. I just reading the tea leaves and how much of a surprise, like we saw on Sunday when he was out, I was kind of shocked because I saw that same report you saw with Tomlin talking to the CBS reporter, making it just a matter of how many plays he gets. But I think would be wise to hold him out. I like that scenario you painted of holding him out against Philly and then giving him a runway to possibly play against the Ravens, because of the 3 games that are ahead of us in this 10 or 11 day snenario, I think the Ravens is the most important game because, like you said, the Chiefs, everything's been going right for them all season long, so they're going to stumble into the 1 seed no matter what, I think.
Yeah, I mean, right. If they win that game against Baltimore, they clinch the division, clinch their playoff spot, et cetera, et cetera. If they win this week, they clinch a playoff spot. I think it's interesting. I don't know how much they're going to, rush him back just to maybe get the division. If they win this week, I think, as you mentioned, I think it's an uphill climb for them to win this week. But if they do win this week, they clinch a playoff spot. And they are in it no matter what. And I wonder if that changes the calculus for Pickens a little bit. Because, again, even if he does play against Baltimore, I have a hard time envisioning him being at 100%. I do not think he's going to play 90% of the snaps against Baltimore or 90% of the snaps against Kansas City. He's probably going to play 20 snaps, third down, red zone. Basically, the plan they had for him this week is what I imagine the plan would be against Baltimore if he plays. Have him out there on significant downs and let it rip. But as you mentioned, the other players, I think the biggest guy that they have plans for is Mike Williams. It certainly sounds like, we have been asking when that Mike Williams train is going to take off. It started a little bit against Cleveland. He had 4 targets. That's a season high for him with the Steelers. He had made that nice catch, that one-handed reverse catch. Also had another big-time catch down the side. They call it OPI. You can debate if it was OPI or not, but he had a few of those big-time contested catches. And he only played 19 snaps, and that's not necessarily what they wanted to happen, obviously, but it's kind of the game plan, right? You can't necessarily shift the game plan because the guy who backs up George Pickens on all the snaps in practice is Scotty Miller. And so they plugged Scotty Miller into where George Pickens would play, and Scotty Miller got the second most snaps on the team. Van Jefferson got the most. But basically, Scotty Miller just replaced George Pickens. They found out literally 90 minutes before the game they couldn't switch things around. Mike Williams, still, even though he's been here for about 6 weeks now, it's not like he knows the playbook that well. Certainly not better than Scotty Miller does. He played under Arthur Smith in Atlanta. So they plugged him in there. But especially this week where they have a full week of planning without George Pickens, expect Mike Williams to be probably this team's wide receiver 1. I'm sure they're going to try and put the focal point through him. I think they need to. Him and Calvin Austin feel like the 2 guys that are going to be featured heavily from the receiving core. I think you're going to see more Pat Freiermuth. I would imagine you see more game planning, with Jalen Warren and Najee Harris out of the backfield. Some more Darnell Washington sprinkled in there probably. But Mike Williams is the biggest benefactor from this. He's going to be the one to make plays. If you saw what Tomlin said today, how they expect him to really take off here down the stretch, they're going to need Mike Williams to play extremely well. He's going to have to be that guy that on third down they can throw it up to and can make those big-time contested catches because the moon balls are such a big part of this offense, and he's really the main guy that can make those plays. And so look out for him to kind of be the guy they feed it to on those third downs with George Pickens out. He's not got the same magnetism that George Pickens does, but he might still get those one-on-one opportunities. And even if you're facing a really good corner room, I feel like in this Eagles room, you have guys like Darius Slay, who's been at it forever. And then you have 2 really good rookies in Cooper DeJean and Quinion Mitchell. You really do think that Mike Williams can maybe make some of those plays. And that's what he was brought here to do. So expect Mike Williams to be the guy that kind of takes off, gets a lot of targets in George Pickens' absence. And then I think, on early downs, what you're going to see is a lot of Freiermuth, Austin down the field. I'm sure you'll see your fair share of others as well. But I would imagine that's the ripple effect with George Pickens out. So with no George Pickens, it changes the entire calculus for how this offense works. George Pickens is kind of the motor to the engine, right? He's kind of what makes the passing offense work. Even if Russ has played extremely well, defense just plays the Steelers differently when Pickens is out there. And so without him out there, they're going to have to kind of expect adjustments from teams. They're going to have to expect probably a lot more man coverage, trying to stop the run game. And we'll see kind of how that works out. But Mike Williams is the guy that's going to have to step up big time, at least this week with George Pickens out and potentially for more games if Pickens misses them.
Yeah, I mean, because like you said, a lot of us were scratching our head why we haven't seen more of Mike Williams sooner in the rotation and 19 snaps, like you said, and you did explain it very well because a lot of those snaps from Pickens went to Scotty Miller. But if a Mike Williams in December of 2024, is he a number 1 guy? Can he fill that role of being the moon ball target, downfield?
I mean, he's not going to be a number 1 guy in the way that you think of as George Pickens. And George Pickens was a guy that got screens, could win underneath, could win at different levels of the field. That's not what Mike Williams does. He is a strictly moonball guy. And so in the aggregate, you're going to have to replace George Pickens in kind of different ways, right? When you talk about the moon balls, yes, you're going to have to go to Mike Williams. So I think Mike Williams can fill the moon ball part of that. Can he be, an alpha target that fills, 10 targets a game? Probably not. Probably get 5 or 6 targets a game. 4 of those will be moon balls. And that's just what it is. So in the aggregate, you're going to have to get, screenplays to Calvin Austin or Scotty Miller, whoever you want to put out there. Whether you want to get tricky and maybe get Jalen Warren work out there, I'm sure Arthur Smith is going to get more Cordero Patterson out there just because, I mean, Arthur Smith loves him some Cordero Patterson. So I'm sure that's going to be something we'll see. But you think about that, and there will just be different things like that. But I imagine, I think when we're talking about those early downs and who's the main target, it's always been Pickens. I imagine the main target now probably moves to 88. I have to imagine you try and get Pat Freiermuth involved a lot more. He's been on a real hot streak in the last 3 weeks. Russ and Pat seem to be kind of figuring things out together. He has a touchdown in 2 back-to-back games. I think he has 15 targets over the last 3 games. He's been really kind of getting in the groove of it. So Pat Freiermuth is probably a big-time target as well, but I don't think Mike Williams has to be a wide receiver 1 if you can replace George Pickens in 3 or 4 different people, because that's what he does, and that's kind of what you're going to have to do. And Russ is going to have to play really good football. Continuing it, I thought, the second half we saw from Russ against the Browns was very encouraging. They kind of floundered in the first half because I'm still not sure they fully knew what their game plan was going to be without Pickens. It was clearly a design game plan with Pickens, with how much they had Scotty Miller out there and how much they were planning all of that. You could tell in the weighty areas where they were going to go to George Pickens that he wasn't there. And so I'm interested to see what the game plan looks like without him. But I think, Mike Williams is going to replace that contested catch downfield part of George Pickens. And then I'm interested to see kind of where else they pick it up, whether that's Calvin Austin, the running backs maybe getting more involved, shifting more to tight end focus. Like, do you try and get Darnell Washington more targets? All those things. It's an opportunity for the Steelers, honestly, to kind of figure out what works outside of George Pickens. And then when George Pickens comes back, if you find something that works, right, if Darnell Washington is actually this unlocked receiving threat that is different, that you didn't know you had fully, right, or you weren't utilizing fully, that could be big. If you get the running back passing game going, and that's becoming a big weapon for you, that can be an adjustment you make. So what it gives Arthur Smith a chance to kind of see what works without George Pickens, and then when you get Pickens back in the lineup, you can actually enhance what George Pickens does. So you don't ever want to lose your top wide receiver like George Pickens, but it also does give Arthur Smith kind of an ability to experiment a little bit and say, hey, what works outside of that? How can we accentuate that? Because I feel like that's been one thing that they've been trying to figure out all years. George Pickens makes great plays because he's George Pickens. He's a phenomenal player. He's in the midst of a breakout season. But how do you accentuate his talents and maximize it and use his magnetism to make the offense better around him? And I think this can be an opportunity to kind of figure that part of it out.
I'll tell you, you're reducing my Pickens panic. I mean, you're making me feel not good about it, because we can't feel good about it, but you're showing me some positive implications of this problem with Pickens, because I like that scenario of finding out what works, and then when you have Pickens back at full strength, you have another dimension to that offense. But I have to agree with you in that first half, that offense just looked terrible. What do you think turned it around in the second half against Cleveland?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, as you mentioned, they really did look terrible. They couldn't really do anything. I don't think the wide receiver play magically got better. They made a few plays, but they were not open most of the day. I think, we saw better play calling from Arthur Smith. I thought in the first half, Arthur Smith was just really, really bad. Running the ball in inopportune times. I thought the run schemes were a little shoddy at times. I thought protection broke down a little bit too easily. So there was a lot that went on there, but it was a team that clearly didn't know what to do without George Pickens. That's what it was. And then I think in the second half, maybe you can even go before the second half, if you really want to go second quarter, maybe even, right? When they scored the touchdown after the Keanu Benton pick. I think they started to kind of lean into a little bit of what they do best against man coverage without George Pickens. And some of that is, okay, moon balls, right? Try and get those going. They knew Mike Williams could make those plays, and he did. I also thought, they got Calvin Austin in some interesting spots where he could win. If Greg Newsome doesn't hold Calvin Austin on that on the drive, they ended up scoring Najee Harris's touchdown. He wins to the corner. He has a touchdown. It's going to be a 31-yard touchdown. So, I mean, their best man coverage beater outside of the moonballs is Calvin Austin, just cooking guys from the slot. So, I think they found different play calls that worked. I also think that the defense, being as stout as they were, allowed the offense to breathe, right? They didn't have to play catch up. They never really had to panic. The Steelers were kind of in control of this game nearly the entire time. And so after that Keanu Benton pick, they never really looked back. I thought in the second half, I thought what really kind of elevated their play was Russell Wilson. I thought that was what elevated them. I thought his second half compared to his first half was astronomically better. The play that sticks out to me, I know some people will point to the great play call for Van Jefferson's touchdown, the nice throw up the seam to Freiermuth, both great plays. But what really stuck out to me was, if you remember 3rd and 10, they're on the wrong side of midfield. They would have had to punt. It was their first drive of the second half, and he kind of scrambles up in the pocket, throws across his body, finds Freiermuth. They end up scoring on that drive for a touchdown. I thought that was an example of what Russ can do to elevate his team. And, you know, I thought the receivers made some nice plays in the second half, right? We saw Freiermuth make 2 big catches. We saw the Scotty Miller catch. We saw Jaylen Warren really start to go off. I thought that was a big part of it, right? Steelers leading more into Jaylen Warren, which I think they need to do more. I think Jaylen Warren is fully back to being Jaylen Warren, which is good news for the Steelers, and he needs more carries. He needs more touches. He outsnapped Najee Harris in this one, 34-27, so they did lean into him more, but I don't see the need for 10 Cordero Patterson snaps. You know, you can put those in the Najee Warren bucket and I think get far more productivity out of them. So I thought that was a big part of it. So I think they found kind of an identity that worked. And I thought Russ was a big part of that. The fact that he played so well elevated those around him. He made really nice throws on the moon balls as well. And I think the chemistry between him, Williams, Miller kind of built a little bit over the game, right? They kind of started talking over what they wanted, what they saw, where to put the ball, and I think you saw those. And so I think that's really what kind of clicked in the second half. Was a little bit of everything just improving a little bit. But let me tell you, man, that the offensive tape, it's not pretty. They scored 27 without Pickens, which is encouraging, even if it's against the Browns, who are not a very good defense statistically. But they do have a talented secondary. So that's cool. But this week's going to be far more stout because the Eagles have one of the best defenses in football. So we'll see kind of what happens there. But yeah, that's kind of the little things. Russ is going to have to be on his A game, you know, to win some of these games if Pickens is out.
I totally agree with you there. And looking at the Eagles, I mean, obviously the defense will be our strength, and they'll be tested with you know, Saquon Barkley, the pride of the playoff-bound Nittany Lions. I think that'll be job one, is stopping Barkley. How do you see that matchup playing out?
It's interesting because, you know, the Steelers, when you look at their stats, are the second worst run defense in football after the bye week, which is interesting. That's according to success rate. They're third worst in EPA per play. I think they are 19th in yards per carry and 16th in yards per game. So in traditional metrics, they're middle of the pack. In a little bit more modern statistics, they are one of the worst run defense teams in the NFL. Here's the issue with some of these statistics. Because, John, I think you would agree with me. They certainly don't feel like the second worst run defense since their bye week, right? So success rate is just simple. It is basically defined of how successful you are in a play. So on 1st and 10, if you get 4 yards, that's a successful run, right? Because you're staying ahead of the chains, you're staying on schedule. If it's 1st and goal, you score a touchdown, that's a successful run, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, are you staying ahead of schedule? Are you staying on schedule? And teams are doing that on the ground against the Steelers, but they don't run the ball very much against the Steelers. The Browns in that snow game ran the ball 27 times against the Steelers. That's the most that any team has tried to do it against the Steelers, and they had their second worst rushing success rate of the season against the Steelers that game. The Ravens, when Derrick Henry came to town, ran the ball less than 20 times against the Steelers. The Commanders barely got over 20. I think they got 21. The Bengals did not run the ball much, even though Chase Brown had that one drive where he just torched them down the field for a big run, including a near touchdown. they have not run the ball much. So this is going to be the first game really where the Steelers have been tested, I feel like, with a run-first game script in a very long time. A lot of teams, the Commanders, the Ravens, the Bengals, came out and wanted to test Pittsburgh's pass defense. And here's the interesting thing, John. If you watch the Steelers defense, you would be more concerned about their pass defense, would you not, right? Well, over the last 5 weeks, those same weeks where they are the second worst run defense, they are a top 5 pass defense in all those metrics. They are second in EPA per play over the last 5 weeks. They are fifth in passing success. Which what tells you is a lot of the big time scores that come against them in the passing game are not necessarily successful passes. It's big plays. It's a big play here or there that are hurting them. And so to cut down on those. But I think the Steelers are kind of going to learn a little bit about themselves. How much can they defend the run? Because when you look at their earlier scheduled games, you think about the Chargers game, you think about the Atlanta game, think about even the Denver game. I remember those teams trying to run the football on the Steelers because the Steelers were a poor run defense in 2023. And that's probably a big part of the reason they were able to win those 3 games. Those teams lean at a run-first game scripts, and the Steelers were able to kind of hound them and stop them. And so this is the first time, I think, since really early in the season where the Steelers are going to be able to figure out how good do we actually defend the run. And so against a team that's probably going to pound the rock more than 30 times against you, I mean, that's significant. And so it's going to take everybody. It takes all 11. I think, Mike Tomlin gave Saquon the Mr. Barkley treatment because of the season he has had, and he has had an absolutely incredible season.
Right.
But they really got to tackle him. I think that's the biggest thing. They've had a few issues with missed tackles at times this year. You think about how they did against Breece Hall, missing a few tackles there. Missed a few tackles against Chase Brown. But they need a tackling performance like they had against, for example, Derrick Henry. So tackling is going to be the big first one, getting off blocks, keeping gap integrity. I think it's a big Landon Roberts game, less so Peyton Wilson, because if they can stop the run, and I think this is going to be interesting to see how their pass defense holds up. I don't know if you've heard the headlines coming out of Philadelphia this week, early in the week so far, John, but this pass offense for the Eagles is one of the worst in the NFL per yards per game.
Yes.
And there's been talk about Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown having a shared relationship. I think those are a little overblown, but still, they have not performed well in the pass game. So if they can slow down Saquon and put the ball in Jalen Hurts' hands, I'm interested to see what happens. That's the game script the Steelers have to follow to win this game. Obviously, you look at the Eagles' passing game and expect them to be able to hold up, right? They have a good O-line. They have Devontae Smith. They have A.J. Brown. Saquon can catch the ball. They don't have Dallas Goedert, who's injured. But can the Steelers put the ball in Jalen Hurts' hands and potentially exploit them that way? I think that's going to be the question. But all this comes down to stopping Saquon. So, that's a big part of it. But, I go back to those 3 games I was talking about, that first 3-game stretch where the Steelers went 3-0. So they held the Atlanta rushing attack to 89 yards. They held the Denver rushing attack to just 64 yards. The Chargers were the team that had run the ball over 30 times per game, came in, only ran it 20 times. Why? They only averaged 3.1 yards per carry, and that is still their season low in rushing success rate. Teams just generally have not run the ball super well against them. And so that is going to be something that's interesting. The Colts game is the most direct comparison I can give you to that. The Colts ran the ball 32 times, had 133 yards and a touchdown. That's 4.2 yards per carry. So they lost that game, obviously. But that was a more run-heavy game script for the Colts. And the Steelers did fine against that. That's not a bad stat line against Jonathan Taylor and that O-line, which I think is underrated. So we will kind of see where this goes. But the Steelers in general have a very tall task. They've also proven that at times they can slow down the run. They can slow down teams with really good rushing attacks. So we'll kind of see what ends up going there. But this is going to be a different game script from really what they faced most of the year.
That's a great point you made about the passing attack of the Eagles and Jalen Hurts, because unlike in Pittsburgh where you are, when I go to a watering hole around Harrisburg, I rub up against any number of Eagles fans, and I hear constant complaints about Jalen Hurts and the passing game for the Eagles. I thought Steelers fans cried about their quarterback. They are not enamored with the productivity of Jalen Hurts in that passing game. So that would be interesting if the Steelers could force it on Jalen's shoulders to see what happens with that. And of course, one of the key cogs to do that, to make to stop the run and to make it more of a Jalen Hurts passing game would be Cam Hayward. And there was a lot of singing of his praises for what he's doing after almost, a large number of the fan base said, well, maybe it's time for him to move on, at 35 or whatever he is. And I saw you putting out some appreciation tweets for what he's doing. Talk a little bit about Cam Hayward and the praise he's getting within the locker room, and what he's doing with the Steelers.
I mean, this guy, to me, is a defensive player of the year candidate. I don't know why he doesn't get more love for it. I think he has a better case than TJ Watt. I really do. You look at what he has done this year at 35 years old. It is just, guys don't do this. Guys can be productive into their late 30s. We've seen this before. We've seen defensive tackles. I'll even, throw out guys like Calais Campbell, who's still doing it, right? If you want to go further back, think of like Steve McMichael, real guys that are, Hall of Famers or all pros. They've played long into their 30s. Cam Hayward's game is built off power. It's never was built off explosiveness. That's a big part of the reason he can still play. Now, his first step is still really good. If you actually look at his first step metrics, he's got the same first step now that he did when he was 29, which is just insane. I mean, that doesn't happen very often, let alone coming off a severe groin injury. I mean, we can't, you cannot discount that. He had a severe injury where not only did he have a sports hernia, he tore his adductor muscle off the bone last year. That is a significant injury, and yet he is back and balling out. No one has been able to block this guy this year. I've seen a lot of people say he has been silent in some games. Please go to those silent games and watch the tape and watch him bully a left guard back into the quarterback about 6 times each game. He's been their most consistent defender in the run and the pass game. He's been absolutely dominant all year. It is unbelievable. I think he's the best interior defensive lineman in football this year. I really do. I think Dexter Lawrence maybe has a mantle to that. Obviously, Dexter Lawrence is going to miss the last 6 or so games of the year, so statistically, it's kind of hard to compare that. Chris Jones is Chris Jones. He doesn't have the statistical production, but still balling out with the Chiefs, of course. But Cam Hayward has just been unbelievable this year. So I wish people would appreciate the season he's having more, because he's going to be a first-team All-Pro. He's going to be a Pro Bowler. I really think he should be the favorite for the Defensive Player of the Year. Right now, TJ Watt is. I understand why it's TJ Watt and kind of what he brings to the defense and how he impacts everything other offenses do, but it's hard to watch what Cam Hayward is doing so far this year and not advocate for that. He's played so well at 35 years old. It's really a rare season. He's having a historic season. I mean, he has 8 sacks. There's 4 games left to play, John. His career high is 12. I mean, he has a very real chance to break that, to set a new career high. I believe I saw the record for anyone over 35 years old at an interior spot is 10 sacks. I think he's probably going to break that. He's just got a chance to really rewrite history. He's doing stuff that no one's done. And I mean, he's playing himself into a gold jacket. That's what he's doing right now. So what we are seeing right now is absolutely insane stuff from a 35-year-old, let alone that is not normal. Cam Hayward is not normal, and he's proving it this year.
Well said. He is not normal. And then let's close with this, Nick. I mean, as you're sizing up any potential soft spots on the Eagles D, and you've already mentioned some potential Pittsburgh heroes in this, what looks like a Pickens-less game. We're not going to have Pickens, Freiermuth, Jalen Warren, Mike Williams. Who is going to be the hero that the Steelers are searching for this Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. This game, as you mentioned, it kind of does. All the chips are stacked against them, right? Have not won in Philadelphia since 1965. That's 59 years ago, folks. That is a long time ago. That was back when the Eagles and the Steelers were still in the same division. That is a long, long time ago. And the Steelers have probably the most significant injury in the game, right? I talked about the Eagles missing Dallas Goedert, which is going to be significant because he's a huge part of their passing attack at the tight end spot. But not having George Pickens, who the passing game literally runs through for the Steelers, is huge. It would be the equivalent of the Eagles losing A.J. Brown. That is exactly what it would be the equivalent of. And so, huge loss for them. And this Eagles team, man, I mean, across the board, you can't really poke a hole in them outside of that the pass offense, right? They're a really good run defense. They're really good passing deep, pass defense. So they have a good secondary. They have really good second level play. The linebackers are playing well. They have good pass rushers, even though they don't have Brandon Graham now. He's out for the year. I think their pass rush, they find different ways to kind of get after it. If you know Vic Fangio, who is their defensive coordinator, he is the originator of all the cover two craze stuff, right? So what that says is it should be a Pat Freiermuth or Darnell Washington game. Can you hit it up the seam? Can you bust them out of that? While they are a heavy cover two team, as I mentioned, I wouldn't be surprised if we see them break tendency and go man to man. I think they can play man to man. And I think that the Steelers receivers do not scare them, nor should they scare them. And so I just have a hard time seeing the Steelers offense have a prolific day through the passing game. And I think that could expose the Steelers run game. I just think the Steelers run game, listen, in terms of sheer yardage, it's fine. I've been a little underwhelmed by their run game late in the year. I feel like, for a team that is supposed to be this great running team, they kind of underwhelmed a little bit. I mean, they did have 120 yards against the Browns, but only 3.4 yards per carry. I mean, against the Bengals, that's a juicy matchup against the Bengals. They did fine in that game, obviously, because the Bengals are just an atrocious defense. I think they ran for 110, 4.2 yards per carry. But, I just think about the team. They are a fine group. They're just fine, though. And you really want them to be elite at running the football. And so they either have to find another gear in their run game, or they have to figure out schemes that are going to work better. Because I don't necessarily think the struggle is their O-line or the running backs or the receivers block. I think a lot of it's schematic. I think a lot of it is kind of cohesion. And the question is kind of how does that work together? So it's a fine run game. I just wish it was better when you built it off that. And I think that would help Russ out so much without Pickens. But we'll kind of see. I think the hero of the game is going to have to be those tight ends or the run game. Because I do think the Steelers defense, it's a really good rush offense, of course, and Saquon will get his. I think he's just that type of guy where he'll hit you with one or two punches, and if you're going to score more than 20 points in this one, I think you'll be able to limit them to a degree. But I really think about how this offense is going to move the football, and so the hero is going to either come from some type of pick six, scoop and score on the defensive side, a Calvin Austin punt return, something like that. But really, the most likely hero for them is going to be something within that run game or something within the tight end room. Or if you really want, to expand that, Mike Williams, of course, because he's probably going to get a higher usage rate, could be the hero of the game. But I think in order to win this game, I think we're going to have to see another gear to this run game. I think that's going to be the big thing, John, because I feel like they're just kind of stuck in neutral right now, right? They're a fine run game. They're not a bad run game, but they're not a truly elite run game. A lot of their yards per game metrics are built off sheer volume, right? 35 rushes, 36 rushes, 37 rushes per game, where they get 120, 130 yards. Yeah, I want to see 35 carries for 200. You know what I mean? Like, that's the type of game that I want to see from this Steelers group, because I think if they can get to that level, I think with the explosive passing game that they have right now, which is great that they found that gear within the passing game, because it has really opened it up. I want to see, can that run game go from, just league average to up here and truly become a top tier run game? Because I think that would really break things open. And I think they have an identity that works, but I think it would be even more enhanced if they can go from, the 18th best running team to the 10th best running team.
Well, I totally agree with you in terms of without Pickens, Arthur Smith is going to be in the lab tinkering with this offense and looking for that other gear or that other ingredient that he can add for this week, and then maybe even when Pickens come back, have another dimension to this offense. So that is hopefully what will emerge on Sunday, and the defense can keep us in this game and keep it close within a possibility of a Mike Williams moonball score. Wouldn't that be something? Well, we'll see what happens in Philly. Two teams at the opposite end of the turnpike set to collide, and it begins that gauntlet of games leading up through Christmas Day. What more would you want? And we'll have plenty to talk about next Tuesday as well. Until then, go Steelers.